This is the individual oral commentary by Byrne for Seamus Heaney's The Forge. Seamus Heaney's sonnet, The Forge, is a depiction of a skilled blacksmith engaged in a dying art. Written in blank verse and strewn with images that are contrasting and evoking ancient elements of fire and water, which are essential to the blacksmith's craft, the poem moves from fear of the blacksmith to admiration for his work and dying craft, much like the work of the ancient Greek god Hephaestus. The first thing that I noticed when I annotated this poem was the form. We have a variation on a sonnet here with 14 lines, single stanza, written in iambic pentameter with an unusual rhyme scheme of A, B, B, A, C, C, D, C, E, F, G, F, E, F. While this is a variation on the sonnet, the sonnet is a traditional form. And traditional forms are often mirrored in traditional content. The content of the blacksmith, the allusion to Hephaestus working at the forge with the comparison to working at the forge and working at an anvil like a unicorn, all evoke mystery and mythological figures and evoke tradition. So that we see a traditional form mirroring a traditional content, discussing blacksmith not only here for the speaker, but as far back as in ancient Greece. All right, so our speaker enters into a forge, which is seems to be down at the bottom of a building, kind of maybe in the center. You almost think of our speaker walking down into the earth's core, a door into the dark. That alliterative door into the dark emphasizes the idea that our speaker is headed into what is unknown and is perhaps fearful or perhaps just a mystery to the speaker. Then we get into the contrasts the speaker notes in the poem. Outside versus inside in those first lines, as well as later on in the poem, our speaker is going to compare water and fire using imagery with a fantails of sparks as visual imagery contrasted with the auditory imagery of the hiss as the sparks toughen in water, or when a new shoe toughens in water. We return back to that mystery and mythical figures with an allusion to the unicorn. A unicorn, of course, a mythological figure known for its regality and uniqueness, as unique as and perhaps as ancient and mythological as is a blacksmith at the forge for the speaker. So we get the feeling we have a modern day speaker watching a blacksmith who perhaps is no longer day-to-day relevant in a modern industrial world. However, our speaker does quickly move from that fear of darkness to admiration. Other contrasting imagery, we see we've got a contrast in past and present, especially in that the images of the blacksmith taking a break from his work, leaning out on a door jamb, recalling the clatter of hoofs, and the clatter of hoofs meaning the time in which men traveled by foot or by horse. So we're pre-industrial revolution versus the time in which the blacksmith looks on now when he hears the sounds of traffic. So we can imagine imagery of sounds of motors, horns of cars. And we should understand that this contrast is not a welcome one for the blacksmith, who grunts and goes in more auditory imagery, and with a slam and flick beats the real iron out. So we know our speaker admires him beating the real iron out, and admires that ancient craft of the blacksmith. All right. We also notice the simile and metaphor that Heaney uses in the poems. The metaphor, which I've already discussed, or the simile of the anvil, which is the primary tool that a blacksmith uses, being compared as being horned as a unicorn, that tool being as unusual and as fantastical and perhaps no longer practical. Also the metaphor of the idea of the anvil being the altar, almost a place of worship for the blacksmith, much like the altar that a priest might use in order to give communion. This evokes the idea that this is a holy place, this forge, and evokes the idea that our speaker greatly admires the work of the blacksmith, almost like one would admire the work of a holy man or woman in faith. All right. Lastly, the lines in which the blacksmith, the speaker noticed the blacksmith expends himself in shape and music. There with that idea of expending himself in shape and music, we have the idea that the blacksmith is an artist, right? Much like a musician is an artist. And perhaps that art must be treasured, much like, or perhaps like, the art of the writer. Is Seamus Heaney questioning the art of the writer and the idea that perhaps that craft too is dying? We don't know.